Microphone is not on. Your microphone is on. My microphone is not on.
Right.
Hi, Diana.
Hi.
Welcome to this wonderful world of video chat thing that we've started to do at the Unscripted Theater Company.
Yay. It's so simple. It just required a lot of tech stuff that neither of us know how to do.
It's true. And then you keep getting pixelated. I'm sorry. But so thank you for keep resetting your computer. I think it's a buffering video issue, but I'll keep telling you about it. So if you ever turn into a crazy pixelated, it looks
Maybe
like
it's protecting my identity.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when I was a witness to a crime.
So, Diana, you have moved to New York. You no longer get to perform with us at Unscripted. I know, it's sad. But it's been really fun getting to having had a chance to work with you over the years, and because you've had like a lot of different things you did at Unscripted. So like, how did you first get started at Unscripted?
So I was living in Boston, but was moving to San Francisco, and I basically was involved in improv a little bit after in college and a little bit after as like my thing that I was holding on to performing. And so I knew when I moved to San Francisco was one of the things I wanted to get involved with, and I was kind of wanting to find quickly like an artistic community.
Right.
And I remember like I'd planned my move, all the logistics, but I hadn't done a lot of research on like who are the theater companies, who are the improv companies out there, like what classes should I take? And I was at my computer and one day I was like, I should research that. So I just typed in Google improv San Francisco, being like, this is a good start. And luckily one of like the first things and like the first site I clicked on was Unscripted. And I still remember like it was a very yellow site. It was very bright and sunny site. And there was some description, I guess, about what Unscripted did that in that moment was intriguing enough for me to go, oh, I didn't know that was really a thing. Like, that sounds really cool, because I do theater. I was coming from focusing a lot on like new works in theater, and this seemed like a cool mixture of everything. And so I was looking at the website and it was like, oh, auditions are happening for this thing, but it was like the week before I moved there.
Oh, you got pixelated again.
Okay. Do.
Yeah, it's good. No, perfect. Like yeah, it's great.
Okay. So there were auditions happening like the week before I moved, and I was like, oh no, I'm gonna miss. I want to get to know these people. I want to get involved, but I'm missing these auditions. But luckily, there was they were looking for submissions for playwrights because it was for Act 1, Scene 2, and this was in 2011. And so I was like, well, at least I can submit, because I wear way too many hats, and one of the things is playwright as well. So I wrote up like the start of a play, because Act 1, Scene 2 is the start of a play, and then the cast finishes the rest of the play. So I submitted, and when I emailed, I was like, by the way, I'm moving to San Francisco. You guys seem great. I do improv, I do theater. I'm looking to get involved. Let me know. You know.
You got pixelated again. It's annoying.
It's very annoying. But
oh my god, you're totally like it looks like some sort of special effect out of like Predator.
I don't know.
No, just reset it. Just reset it. It's fine.
Hold on.
I think perfect. So So you wrote a script for Act 1, Scene 2. So the premise of Act 1, Scene 2 is that a bunch of improvisers get a script the night of the show. They do a staged reading of it, and then they continue on in the playwright's voice so that it looks like the playwright wrote an entire story.
And what was so intriguing about it was because, again, I was coming from focusing a lot on new works, that the idea of using improv as a tool to develop plays was like right up with what I was trying to do anyway. So it was a great first show to get introduced to. And then what happened was my play got chosen. So it was this awesome thing where I was moving to a new city and I was like, yeah, I have a play that's going to get produced. But it was basically
you got pixelated again.
okay. It's everyone's gonna love my headshot. It's actually an old headshot.
It's a great headshot. I like it.
Did it fix it?
It fixed it perfect. Yeah,
okay.
It's great.
And so I moved there like having Unscripted as like my first artistic project and group that I was gonna get involved with. And so the first thing I got to see, the playwrights were invited to a dress rehearsal for Act 1, Scene 2. And so there I met most of like the main players. Like I met Clay for the first time. I met like Melissa, Paul, because they specifically were like, oh, you just moved from Boston. We've all lived in Boston.
Yeah, there's a big contingency of people at Unscripted from Boston.
Yeah. I'm not from Boston, but I went to college in Boston.
Right.
Proud New Yorker here. Anyway, so I got to meet people, and then we watched the dress rehearsal, and I don't remember what show it was, but I remember it being like magical. This was my first time seeing Unscripted in action, and I was basically hooked. I like my play was exciting, but I was like, I need to be involved any way I could. And what ended up happening was the playwrights for that run were told, you know, if we have extra tickets, you could get a comp. Like if we have extra spaces last minute, we'll squeeze you in right before the show starts. And I just moved there, like didn't know anyone, had nothing to do anyway. And I basically ended up going to like 75% of the shows.
Wait, reset your video. And while you're doing that, did you come and volunteer for the San Francisco Theater Festival show? Was it like an outdoor thing at Fort Mason?
Yes. I feel like that was the first time we like chatted about improv.
Yeah, that was that was fun. So like you just like volunteered. You're like, oh, I want to help you guys out.
That was the thing, is like I kind of knew that Unscripted was doing stuff I wanted to be involved in, and if I was gonna be involved and there weren't auditions happening, I mean, you learn to do that, especially in college. You're like, let me volunteer usher. What do you need help with? Just like put me in, coach. Put me in. Like
right.
And it quickly was a group that I found I wanted to get to know more. So I think it was like a volunteer opportunity. And I was like, yeah, let me go. Let me help out. And that's called networking. So what happened was that I ended up going to so many of the Act 1, Scene 2 shows. And the ones I didn't go to probably were just because I felt like I was looking weird and just showing up every day. So I basically saw like all of Act 1, Scene 2, and then a little while later got to then audition for the next show.
So why? So awesome. Google helped you find us, but like, how did what we were working on like sort of match up with what sort of you were working on like prior to this? And reset your video again.
Ooh. Okay. So I had just I had gone to 4 years of college as a theater student, as an acting student. In doing that, I really found that I liked new works and the development of material. When I graduated, I had written a musical and developed it, and also had to write a thesis paper on I chose it to be the state of musical theater and how it can be different. And I've just been very invested in theater, in musical theater, but also like creating it from scratch in a way. And I it was just under a year that I was in Boston after I graduated, and that time I had been working with this theater company, 1111, which doesn't quite exist in the same way anymore, but they solely were focused on new works, and I knew, okay, this is what I like. But at the same time, I was taking improv classes at Improv Boston. I had done a bit of improv in college as well, and they were just two simultaneous things happening. And not really until I discovered and saw Unscripted in action, and then subsequently performed in shows with Unscripted, did I even realize, oh, this particular type of narrative, long form, dramatic improv is something that I really love and want to do forever.
Right. And we just happened to be at the time working on sort of a narrative long form kind of format.
Yeah. So it kind of was a perfect show to get introduced to Unscripted.
Right. Reset your video again. So after Act 1, Scene 2, like, what happened sort of next with at
Like
Unscripted? Did you immediately start doing shows? Did you take classes? Like, I don't remember exactly how it all panned out.
Yeah, so the next thing was A Tale of Two Genres, which was the Dickens-inspired musical. And so I signed up to audition, but honestly, like, didn't expect much because at that time, I had never done musical improv. I actually had taken classes at Improv Boston, and you needed to get to a certain level before they let you take musical improv, and that was like my goal. But I took all those classes and then moved, so I basically was like, musical improv was something I'd been striving to do but hadn't quite done yet. And then in the audition process, I remember there was a time where I just had to sing like a solo song, and I'd been like, let's try this. This is the first time I'm doing musical improv. But all of those years of performing musical theater and writing songs in musical theater with my improv background kind of merged in that time. And so I guess my audition was good enough. And then, so yeah, I performed in that run of Tale of Two Genres. And
Vanessa was new too in that show, yes? Or not?
I feel like she had been involved previously, but I could be wrong.
I don't remember. But it was interesting, like, that's a great example of, like, auditioning for an improv show, because I was directing that show, and from the auditioner side as opposed to the auditionee side, like, different groups. Nice mug, by the way.
I know, I was gonna do it, and then Tara did the same thing, and I was like, "Oh, she stole my thing," but maybe we'll just make it
like a thing.
Everyone has to. I have two because one has my last name spelled wrong. Thank you, Clay Rose.
From the auditioner side of things, like, to get cast in a show, like, there are a lot of things that different directors are looking for, and sometimes they're looking for different things at different times. And at that particular time, Molly and I were specifically looking for people who were trained singers, and that's something that you definitely had.
Thank you.
I mean, you were amazing. And for those of us, I mean, like, I guess when we started Unscripted, we sort of thought, hey, you know, we spend a lot of our time learning from being on stage in a performance. So if we want to, like, get better at something, we should be performing something that teaches us how to be better at the thing we want to be learning.
That's so true, because I feel like even now when people ask, like, oh, where have you studied? Where have you done improv? I say Unscripted, but I mean it in a way of, like, I was taught at Unscripted by performing like 2 years worth of shows, essentially. Like,
yeah,
that's the way to learn.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that she and I were both excited about was learning how to become better singers. And to do so, we were definitely looking to cast people who were better singers than ourselves. And I saw that in your your audition, and I was like, oh wow, I want to learn how to sing like that. That's like really fun, because you had a lot of musical experience up until that point. Yeah.
I was just, a musical theater kid my whole life. Like my sister and I doing shows on Long Island, like a lot of community theater and school, and then going to college, not for musical theater specifically, but for theater, acting, directing, and playwriting. And then my thesis and my personal work in college being writing musicals and studying the state of musical theater. And I mean, a lot of my musical theater training, as far as what I then used to help develop curriculums and other things in the musical improv world, was dissecting musicals, just sitting in my room and listening to a musical from start to finish and trying to get like the plot, like not looking at the insert yet. Like I would do a listen and just not look at anything, not know anything, and try to see what was going on, and then I would just go deep in. And anyone who's done that as a kid, if it's like, oh, I watch comedy videos because I want to be a comedian, you just absorb things and you learn that way.
Yeah. Reset your video again. And while you're doing that, that's funny that you say that, because I think a lot of what sort of I think about when I'm thinking about doing sort of a format or an improv show of any kind, or even like, trying to mimic a genre, like I try to avoid improv as my inspiration and look at the original source material and try to figure out, like, okay, what do I need to know in order to be able for the end product of what it is that I'm doing to be the thing that I'm wishing to be performing. Reset your video again.
Oh my God. I'm sorry to all the viewers. I don't know.
It's okay.
But no, that makes sense, because even with with Tales of Two Genres, what happened was it was a Dickens musical, but it was inspired every night by a different either book, movie, or something like that. And so it always tried to not just be, an improvised Dickens show, but it was trying to tell this like narrative story. And when we got the suggestion, it wouldn't just be like we did The Hangover once, like, great, we're not just doing The Hangover, but we understood, like, okay, what are the themes of it? And we would pull out stuff so that even it helps train the audience.
Reset your video again. It helps retrain the audience.
To be like, great, you said The Hangover, we're going to be inspired by that, but I want to set your expectation that with us pulling out, like, what are the themes, get a little deeper beyond like The Hangover, what's in it, what are the character relationships you like about that story. It shows them that our inspiration is at a deeper level than just going for the joke.
During that run, I remember the show that you like switched from like, I understand this style of improvisation. What was that like for you on the inside?
So I specifically remember like the rehearsal process. I was learning, like I was thrown into this new, like just so scared a lot of the times. And I remember we were in our dress rehearsal and I kind of lost it a little bit because my fear and my anxiety kind of got to a certain point where I was like, tomorrow I'm performing this in front of people and I suck at this. I'm not good. Like my instincts are there, but I'm just not getting it. And at the time, and this was actually a really big thing that I learned about this style in this moment, was I was accidentally becoming the protagonist all the time in rehearsals. And I remember, I think in that dress rehearsal, I had been the protagonist and my sort of anxiety happened during, I think, intermission.
Right.
And it may have been you or someone else had kind of pointed out, like, don't worry, like, even if you're the protagonist, the reason this is happening is because actually the protagonist doesn't take charge and lead everything. The protagonist is the one that has things happen to them and they just react. So you being green to this style is the rest of your performance saying, I got your back, let me initiate, let me guide you. And so inevitably a new person would fall into that protagonist role. And so it took some of that pressure off me of like, if I'm in that protagonist role, I have to know exactly what I'm doing. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but that was a bad moment. But then my first show, I think, was the Groundhog Day show.
Yes.
And that's one of my favorite shows, because what was good about that happening as my first show right after this, like, I can't do anything.
Reset your video again. You can't do anything. And then it just...
So, what was great for that, though, because we're dealing with 2 acts. We have like about 50 minutes and then about 50 minutes, but with an intermission in the middle. I know the structure of Groundhog Day. So going into it, it was like, okay, at least I know whatever happens, all we have to do is repeat that slightly differently and have people change. But that was a structure I could cling on to as this newbie that was very afraid.
Right.
And so we did Act 1, and it was whatever it was, some Dickens story. And I think I was like this naive love interest, which I think I ended up doing a lot in those early shows. But Act 2, I felt so confident because I was like, we already did the story. I just have to go. And like everyone else, if I wasn't sure, other people would have my back and initiate. So that was such a trial by fire run for me, and that show in particular.
It's fun to like come at sort of storytelling from the point of view of like, if you want to tell a good story, if you teach each individual improviser in the group like the skills necessary so they alone could write a good story, then it will come together without having a set narrative structure that forces sort of untrained improvisers to not make detrimental mistakes. And as a result, for me, like as a performer, like it's a format that, or it's a sort of a theory of sort of improv performance that forces me to get better. Like I have to get better. I have to always be sort of like understanding my pitfalls, my stereotypes, and to like make space for all sorts of different kinds of stories to be told.
Yeah, exactly. Like the thing that early on I noticed was different about working with Unscripted, or that type of work, was because when you're doing improv comedy, and whether that's short form, long form, like you're learning the skills it takes to be an improviser, and there's so much that goes into that, like yes-anding and heightening and building the game, etc. So all of us kind of had those base level improv training and skills. But then with Unscripted, every show you had to learn how to also be a playwright on top of being an improviser. And I think we've used the terminology like either hats or different brains. Like you have an improviser brain and a playwright brain. And then if it's musical, you have a composer brain, you have a lyricist brain, you have a librettist brain, playwright. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, and then also we have to be directors in a way too, because we're doing the blocking in real time. We're doing potential choreography in real time. So it's just these added responsibilities in this type of show because it's emulating theater as opposed to not taking on that responsibility.
Yeah, totally. And then cut to later on down your career at Unscripted, you and I sat down to rewrite a musical theater class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I forget when exactly that happened because I did a few shows. I was always in all the musicals. But yeah, so I think you had approached me about this class that Unscripted wanted to do and collaborating with Jacob on making that and with yourself on kind of developing that. And that was another time where I was like, I know I can do this. I know I have the skills, but like, what am I doing? And I just sort of finally had to sit down and take all of this knowledge that I learned both like in a formal setting, improv, college, like theatrical degrees and whatnot, and all of this unofficial knowledge, which should not be discounted if you're pursuing art in any way. Like you can learn so much on your own by seeking out things. And so I was able to really sit down and say, okay, I've performed a few shows with Unscripted. This is how we do it now. But, you know, thesis writer of like, where could we go with like the format of musical theater and why musical theater should be pushed and new works and all this stuff. That created this curriculum that was like, well, actually, if we break it down to like, let's teach how composers write song structure for musicals. Let's teach how librettists like think about a narrative arc. Let's think about how lyricists, I love lyrics so much. But
reset your video again.
Okay. But how lyricists, that's a very specific skill in musical theater, and how rhyme and how rhyming and not rhyming kind of come into things. And so that became a curriculum that luckily we got to test out with the Unscripted company, because I think the purpose of that class was to get a cohesive style amongst the main players so that we could grow together and then move forward with more advanced musicals.
Which is an amazing goal to do. But one thing I did not tell you before we did that class and have learned from teaching that class is that teaching experienced improvisers and teaching beginning improvisers, one is not better than the other. It's just different, and they have their own set of difficulties, each one. Beginning improvisers have a ton of like their stuff that they've brought to the table that they haven't unlearned yet. You know, you have to teach them to stop being afraid of failure, and how to and through that subconscious behavior, how to help them not destroy other people's ideas all the time, because the simulated danger of in a scene is exactly instinctually the same as a real bit of danger in life. And we've, you know, survived to the point where we're now improvising on a stage. We have not, you know, been run over by a car or all sorts of things that could cause you danger in your life. And
low stakes danger improv.
Yeah. But it doesn't feel that way. You get out on stage and it feels like the most dangerous, scary thing in the world. And you have to teach beginning people like, and that's why beginning improv can be so fun and so freeing, is that it's a lot of letting go of baggage that you didn't know you had, and that you redo your thing again, that you didn't know you had, and you bring it to the table and you're trying to let it go, and then all of a sudden there's like this release and you're playing for the first time than you were a little kid, and it's great. Cut to advanced improvisers, you've already learned those skills, but you like unconsciously have decided how the right way to do things is. And for us, we sat down and tried to like reinvent everything we knew about musical theater and how to do it, and then to unleash that on a bunch of people who were like felt very confident and professional in their careers, understood what it felt like to be on stage and be successful. And then you challenge the things that they know, you end up getting pushback. And so learning how to sort of deal with teaching advanced improvisers is just an equal skill to learning how to teach beginning ones.
Well, and that's what made, I think, me such an interesting choice in looking back on it, is that I taught improvised musical theater before I ever took a musical improv class, because at this point in my journey I'd never studied musical improv. I just learned it on, like I said, unscripted shows were class in a way, but I was approaching it from this sort of blank canvas perspective of solely really from the musical theater world, as opposed to, okay, well, I did take this musical improv class at this improv school and this musical improv class at this improv school. And so I think that's what made me stay really like pure in what I was trying to teach.
Which is exactly why I asked you to help create that class, because you had not been all of us in the San Francisco Bay Area scene who were kind of at that level at that time were sort of had learned from the same people, and we had
Exactly.
all learned the same skills. And to have someone with like, oh, I came from college doing musical theater, like I could figure out how to teach an improv musical class would be different just because you hadn't gone like, oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to use that too.
Right. And that it's been so interesting because I got to teach that class then, like a few rounds of that class for about a year or so before I moved to New York. And so coming from this, like, yeah, I built this and I'm good at this now and I know this very niche skill, and I moved to a new city where no one cares. You're a nobody. Like, you have to prove your worth again. And like, not only are you a nobody as a teacher, but as an improviser, and also as the style of work you're doing that people would value enough to want to spend money on it then. So that became like, oh, like that's been my whole like New York trajectory in different ways and in different ups and downs, but like, oh, okay, there's new challenges here.
So I I want to talk about that. I definitely want to talk about it. Before we move on to that, I want to say like a couple of things that were surprising for me, because one of the reasons why I was like, oh, right, like this is about teaching advanced improvisers is I was one of your students in that, and I was being challenged to do things that I had not ever been challenged to do in improv before. For example, to recall songs that I sung earlier in the show and then sing a reprise of the same song later in the show. That is not only a difficult, it's a much less difficult challenge for the musician, because any musician has played reprises in musicals before who has come from musical theater. So they're like, oh yeah, I could play that song again. Maybe, but you have to remember the chords you played. Also, it also freed up our musicians to play a lot similar songs to the previous song they just played, because a lot of composers do that.
Yeah, like this idea of what I've kind of coined as like musical recall is like the essence of this skill. And so as an improviser, it forces you to take responsibility for what you're delivering musically, because many times improvisers are doing so much and they're doing a great job of like, okay, I have this relationship and I'm doing this, or my blocking, and I'm doing everything. But in musical or improvised musical theater, sometimes, as I tell my students, how many times have you sung something that's like, I am going to the store and I don't know what, and you don't know what just came out of your mouth, because that's natural. You're having to be 2 steps ahead, and so you're not really realizing what you've just sung. And so this trains the skill of, I know what I just sang and I'm creating a muscle memory of music as an improviser, so that I can do this very musical theater thing of reprising it later, and then we discuss reasons why it would be reprised and who would reprise it and what that means to the story. Oh my god, I love this stuff so much.
Me too. It's so exciting.
Yeah, I feel like I just went on a nerd like detour. I forgot what you were talking about before that.
No, I guess the next logical progression of this conversation would be like, what is it like to go to a new city for the first time, and to like try and, I don't know, find your people and be, I mean, you have always been really excited about New York. You've always been really excited about Broadway. And to make that step to go there was like a very logical progression for you.
Right. And like, I'm from Long Island, so I'm from the New York area, and New York City is kind of always my home city. So it was inevitable that I was going to come here and live here for my whole life. And at that time, what was good about living in San Francisco was I had experience, and going to school in Boston, I had experience starting over, just the logistics of a human starting over in a new city from scratch and all of that. So coming to New York, it was that. It was like finding a job and pursuing your art and being broke and finding an apartment. And NYC has a particular way of being like, you got to earn your keep here. But it was just a very different experience because it wasn't, I could never have had the same um, journey where I just am like, moving to New York, improv, New York. Oh, there's the thing, and they're taking submissions. I mean, it could happen, but it's just a different beast over here. Like the
Right.
industry.
Reset your thing again.
Yeah.
In San Francisco, New York used to be the most expensive place in the world, and then San Francisco got the tech industry, and it like gutted sort of housing and businesses and arts, and mostly because of the real estate. But when I was getting to know you, like I was shocked at how much student loan debt you had to pay every month. Like I'm struggling to survive as an artist, and I was like,
Why are you bringing up my student loan debt?
no, I was just like, it's like the level of difficulty for you seems so much higher than the level of difficulty for me. Like I'm struggling to survive, but you have double the bill that I had to pay.
Exactly. The plight of the millennial.
It's not good.
I am literally living like the millennial experience of having that student loan and like obviously responsible about it, under control, but I literally would double my income if I didn't have student loans. And so that's a very particular thing that when you are moving to a city, you budget because you're like, I can only afford this. And that's not just for housing. Like, finances were a huge, money was like a huge thing, especially my first year of coming here. And it affected my decisions to get involved with certain arts or classes and things in a huge way that it hadn't. Because, like I said, in San Francisco, I could be like, yeah, I'll volunteer for this thing and I'll get involved this way. And in New York, it was like, oh, you could try to intern, but uh, there's 100 people that also want to intern at this improv theater because there's New York has a lot of improv institutions, as opposed to, I mean, San Francisco, Boston, they do as well, but it's kind of different. It's a different feel. And so New York, I knew because of my finances, I had to be really picky about where I kind of went all in on. Like I knew I wanted to find sort of a substitute in a way of like this artistic home and a place that I could keep pursuing this work and find my people. And so I could like, go to shows at this place and feel it out or go to open free jams. But that kept me very much on this like back end for a while of like, if I'm going to go in on classes, like one, I can't even afford classes at this point. So what other ways are there to get involved? And so little by little, I would find ways, and I was able to take classes and intern. And, I would say a great suggestion is if you're low on money and you really want to do something like take a class, just reach out and say, hey, do you have a payment plan? Do you have scholarships? Because people are sometimes willing to work with you if you're enthusiastic. So that's a bit of advice. So that kind of worked out well. But I was trying to find these alternate places in New York to these big institutions, just because once they've proven what they do and it didn't match with like what I was pursuing, it didn't seem worth the financial investment to kind of go that route, even though it would have been a great, fun experience. And so, like, I got involved at the Annoyance for a bit because a New York branch of the Annoyance popped up, and that was great. I got to do some musical improv stuff and improvised stuff. But then that closed down, and there was another place that was short-lived here that was doing... There was a place in New York that was doing some narrative stuff, and I met a few people that were doing really good, like, improvised Chekhov and stuff like that. But that closed down, too. And so the last few years that I've been here, at least, some of these different improv places that are smaller, it's kind of hard for them to find their place in New York too.
Well,
Which eventually led to me being like, I gotta make it myself.
so you kind of gave up and started your own show?
I wouldn't say gave up. I feel like I was always assessing the investment worth versus what I was getting out of it, because always in the back of my mind it was like, I still want to pursue this very niche area of improv. And keep in mind, I'm also trying to pay my bills, working full-time, working multiple jobs, doing other artistic stuff. Like, I'm a singer-songwriter, and sometimes I forget to do gigs, and like all of these things. Like, I do too many things, like I mentioned. And so there was always brewing this, like, one day I'm gonna just have to form what I like to call, we need Unscripted East out here.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's something we've talked about a lot over the time from different people who've left. Maybe COVID-19 has shut us down. They've shut every theater company down. And if, I don't know, we've mused over maybe having sort of a franchise kind of model and growing ourselves. We'll see what happens after COVID, if we can survive through it. I mean, other theater companies have already shut. When UCB closed in New York, like, we were ready to close too, and we're like, you know what, if they can close, like, maybe we could close too. The Stud, I don't know if you've ever been there, but they're a gay bar in San Francisco who's been around forever. They just chose to do the same thing. Like, if you are looking at in San Francisco, they pass a law saying you can't be evicted, which basically means you get a free loan for your rent until 6 months after the lockdown officially ends. Once you redo your camera again. So we were like, okay, we'll take that on, but like, that's fine, I guess, but we can't survive making that rent up down the road, even if we open back up again. Like, how are you supposed to double your income? So for the Stud,
like to have student loans now.
Exactly.
You're a millennial.
No, for the Stud, what they looking at, like, okay, we have no income right now. We are barely making our rent right now. So it doesn't make sense to be saddled with debt down the road that we'll never be able to pay back. Let's close our doors now. We will save that money that would have just gone down the toilet, and then we'll keep our reserves, do some fundraisers or whatever. They have a really vibrant like drag queen community that supports their work. They do like Twitch shows, and they have a big community now who's still doing stuff even though they're closed, and they're going to take that money and invest it in a new home somewhere else, because developers have had their eye on that space in Soma to build luxury condos that will just sit vacant, so we can
It's the same here, like nothing.
Well, and maybe COVID-19 will change that. If the arts can hunker down and make it through to the other side, maybe there'll be new real estate opportunities that didn't exist before. The bubble.
I'm hoping I can afford like a dog-friendly, like 1-bedroom.
Exactly. I mean, we're living in a crazy bubble where, like, you're expected to be able to pay a rent that is, 200% of your income, and it's just not feasible. Like, every house in the world is not luxury housing, but that's what the real estate, at least in the Bay Area, has been treated like every little shack. Like, oh great, like there's no walls, but it's $1 million. You're like, no, it's not. I'm sorry.
New York's been playing that game a long time. Manhattan especially. Here's a closet. It's $8,000 a month. But I mean, that's so it's the biggest thing on all of us artists' minds right now, of like, the landscape's going to be different, and where does it end up, and how are we going to exist? And so in a way, I think my experience of sort of being this like homeless improviser in a way has prepared me, because I mean, there's a lot of people in New York who will take classes and do stuff, but they they create work themselves. Like New York is such a city of people aren't
Oh,
going to give you that opportunity. Like you need to create it yourself.
like
So
Chicago in a way. I mean, I don't know if you know much about the Chicago improv scene, but a lot of improvisers will be like, "Oh, I want to do this thing. I'm going to start a group, and we're going to rent a hour time slot at a place, and we'll do that." Is that a similar thing that happens in New York?
it is, but typically a lot of people here, I think, tend to follow a specific format. So a lot of people are doing their own stuff, but kind of follow a model that's very New York improv scene. Like they'll, we have a code now.
Yeah, it's good.
Um, so, I mean, there's very much the thing of like you form your improv team here, and people get coaches, and you pay dues, and you get space, and you practice once a week, and that's like the structure if you want to go out on your own thing. And so, we haven't even touched on like the few things I've done and tried to develop here in New York as like the self starter stuff, but I knew that if I was doing that, like that's been a struggle. Is like how do you like you said, retrain advanced improvisers from these habits, whether it's on stage or off stage, to see that there's a potentially different way. And coming from Unscripted, which is more of like a theater company setting where um, you'd have a group, but it wasn't that you just did one show in one format. You did runs of shows that were challenging you with what you wanted to do at that time. That was kind of an idea I wanted to pursue here in New York. And not discounting anything that anyone does here in New York because everyone's so talented and funny. It's just, I am still in this place of like trying to fit what Unscripted does and that style into New York.
Every
And
time we've gone to a theater festival, I've felt like a weirdo who didn't belong. Every single time. Like, and we would go out and we would start performing in front of the audience. Everybody prior to us was like had a very similar style. Everybody who came to see the previous group's style, and then we would come out and they would be like, what is happening? Like, why is the pacing of this different? Why is the serious of
where's
this
the laughs?
right? Like, how come it's like not? And then at the end, when we were done and bowed, we got a huge round of applause. But there was a you'd be like running at full speed, and then you'd hit our time slot, and it would be like, and then they would be like, but then you'd win them over by the end. And at the end of it, the audience loved it, thought it was really
That's
cool.
totally- that's the challenge of this style, and I, oh my god, I have so much to say about it. But again, it's retraining the audience's expectations, and that's what's hard in New York because New York has such a presence of improv that has existed for a long time. And when you say you're doing improv, people are like, "Great!" They already know, and you go, "But." So what happened was, I in 2018. There were two sort of iterations, but I had wanted to kind of bring Unscripted a little more out here, and so you guys had given me the permission to do Act 1, Scene 2 out here. And at that time, I had been forming relationships with other improvisers, people that had shown interest, were wanting to do similar stuff, but not having like the tools or, the infrastructure to have that exist already. And so I was able to like set up this show. We were doing a run at the Pit, the People's Improv Theater, for the first one, and then we performed at the Tank, which is a great space, for the second one. And that was my first real attempt at going, guys, this is what we're in for. It was retraining a lot of improvisers that I knew had the instincts and could do this. I also think New York is positioned in such a cool place for this style because the theater world is huge here. Like, I don't necessarily need to cast someone who's an improviser because if I cast someone similar to me that just has done theater their whole life and maybe gets the idea or can quickly learn these improv skills, would be a great fit as well. So I tried to have a good balance of people with theatrical and improv backgrounds, and we had real success with that. Like, it was so rewarding it was a struggle, especially from the audience perspective and getting people to understand what it was, but it was so rewarding, and we got a lot of similar reactions of getting them on board by the end. And we've tried. I love this group of people so much, and we've tried to kind of continue it past then, but it's been really hard logistically, so that's kind of on pause. And in fact, I was just starting this other group of folks to focus mostly on musical things, with Jess Daly, who had been involved with Unscripted and was one of my students out there, and some other amazing folks. And we had like 2 rehearsals, and then COVID happened. So this is this like group that's primed and ready to go. But yeah, Unscripted East just needs to come out here.
Well, we were supposed to come out to the New York Musical Improv Festival, and
yeah, I supposed to perform
and then
with y'all.
Well, you could. I mean, like, to redo your thing again.
Okay. That's the thing too. So the festival circuit, like you mentioned, has been so interesting. And I was looking forward to performing with Unscripted in New York, which I'd done once before. But then that was literally the day, like, Broadway shut down and everything, that the festival was canceled. But
And people caught COVID from rehearsing anyway.
Rehearsing
at the New York Musical Improv Festival. That's what I heard. Is that true?
I don't know if people caught it there, but there were people later that tested positive, because there was this, it was canceled, but there was it was kind of like, oh, everyone was in town already, so some people got like a studio together and did like a jam.
And then some people tested positive later.
Yeah, it was just so hard. Like that week, everything changed by the minute in New York. Like, it was very hard to know what... I had multiple things that week lined up, because I had a class show, because I've been involved with the Freestyle Love Supreme Academy, and we officially didn't really graduate because our class show was that night too. So anyway, but going back to the festival circuit, because I think that's
yes
interesting, because I've gotten to get involved through my other show, Bookends, that I do with Clay, who's been a part of Unscripted, is we've found the same struggles of, like, basically our show, Bookends, A Musical Journey, takes the musical of the last 5 years by Jason Robert Brown, which is a very specific structure where they alternate songs. It's mostly music, like 98% music. They alternate, but she starts at the end of the story and goes towards the beginning. He starts at the beginning, goes towards the end, and they like meet in the middle. So it's very complex and cerebral. Like, who would choose to do this as an improvised form? This gal. Just because it was a perfect challenge, and it was, 2 people and a piano player, and it was a perfect thing to bring to festival. So we've done it at the West Coast Musical Improv Festival a couple times, and we've done Chicago and New York. And this year we were actually supposed to go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which has been canceled, but we're slated right now to do it in 2021. And what I've always said with it is, like, so many improvisers, like, they feed off the laugh, and, like, that's why they do improv, and comedy is cathartic, and that's why they're drawn to it. Oh, I love when I make someone cry in the audience. I love it so much. And when they're not expecting it too, like at these festivals, there is that, like, what's happening? And, oh, we get it. Why have you moved us so?
No, it's totally true. I mean, improv is an interesting beast in the fact that, like, a lot of times, and that this is changing, it's slowly changing, but for a long time, like, someone would say, I'd be handing out flyers on the street to a random person, I'd be like, oh, come to my improv show, and they'd be like, oh, improv? I've seen improv before, I don't like improv. And no other medium in the world do people go like, oh, movies, I've seen a movie before, I don't like movies. Like, nobody says that. They go like, oh, well, I don't like horror movies, or I don't like pot smoking comedy movies, but they don't say, like, I don't like movies as a format because I saw one style of movie that I didn't like. And improv, because so much of the style has historically been taken up by one style of improvisation, a lot of people equate the format with the medium with that particular format. And when we went to Chicago this last year and performed in the Dramatic Improv Festival, I was like, okay, sure, maybe this will be. I was shocked. I was shocked that I did. It was the first time I've ever been anywhere where I didn't feel like I was the weirdo. Now, a lot of groups were farther behind than we were in terms of like what dramatic improv meant. Like for a lot of groups, like it was just like, oh, let's fight on stage for the same argument for our entire set, and that will be dramatic. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a beginning. But it's like, this kind of theater is very similar to short form improv in the fact that if you're doing a theater sports show, for example, redo your thing again. If you're doing a theater sports show, you're thinking about shape of show. Like, oh, okay, like the beginning of the show has to have this kind of energy, and you have to have every scene can't be exactly the same. And when you get to the end of the show, it should have sort of this kind of feeling to it, and you should take the half at kind of this kind of feeling. Keith Johnstone talked about that kind of stuff all the time. He did not want improvisers to get stuck in sort of doing the same thing over and over and over again. And the same thing is true for any format. If you're doing horror as a genre, like you don't want to have a zombie jumping out at the audience every single scene. That's not how horror movies work. Like you have to start out where everybody's happy, and then like bad things happen, and then like somebody survives and wins over the thing, and then maybe the thing isn't dead at the end. You know, like there's many different styles of horror, from slasher to psychological thriller, you know. And same thing is true of drama.
That was my same like feeling of musical theater. Why I wrote my college thesis was like, we go through waves, and like, where are we at? And that carried over in the improv world. But like, yeah, there's different ways to tell these stories. I will never forget. And I love these people, and this was a great experience. But there was this one moment. So I was on a musical improv house team for a while at QSIC, which is Queen's Secret Improv Club, which is also now defunct. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't exist anymore in New York. And we were on a team, and we had just kind of auditioned and been put together and had practice just kind of doing montages, and then we were going to figure out a format, and we had our own coach, and there were other house teams. And the first time that we did a show where we decided we weren't going to do montage, we kind of just did it because our coach wasn't there, so we hadn't really established it. But it was like right before the show, we're out front, and since our coach wasn't there, we're like, why don't we try doing a narrative? Because that was always the point, was to do narrative. And I'll never forget, because one person was like, yeah, let's do narrative, because all of us know how the narrative structure goes, right? So we have the protagonist scene, the antagonist scene, and then the charm scene, and I was like, wait, there's more, there's other ways. But it was kind of like a moment. There wasn't time to teach all of the possibilities of narrative improv in that moment, because we were about to perform. So that's the thing, is in New York, there's so much good musical improv happening. And like Magnet especially, like they're the home of musical improv here, and they host the New York Musical Improv Festival. And they particularly teach this one narrative structure. I mean, I haven't done the classes, but just people I've worked with that have gone through it. And so I think because they kind of have that covered, I think there's room for us to be like, hey, when you are doing your own project that's outside of those institutions, feel free to break that format, because the style doesn't have to be the same as the format. Those things can be different, and you can keep a certain style but change the format, the structure of the show, or you can say, I want that structure but I want to do it in a different style. I think some of us in the improv world don't understand that they could be disconnected.
Yeah, for sure. Your thing is crazy again.
Oh my god. Also, I sound like that I'm like not into the New York scene, but I love New York. I'm like, there's so much good stuff.
I love New York so much. It's such a great city.
It's my city. But we are like primed now. I think it could be so interesting of what comes out of this, like you said, because we're all self-starters. We've all been stewing in these quarantines trying to stay artistic. And so what's going to come out after this, I think, will be like a revitalization and a resurgence of whether it's improv and theater and whatnot. So I think
if we can survive, like, you know, I know my roommate was just saying, like, half a dozen of his friends have left already. They're all artists. They can't be saddled with no income and the rent still coming.
right. I mean, that's a huge thing in New York because there's a lot of New York artists that are transplants, and so you know, we went through phases where it was like, this will just be a 2-week thing, to this will be a month, to we'll tack on another month. Meanwhile, all of us are like, this is going to be a year. This is going to be like, and so when people have been using Broadway as sort of benchmarkers for the greater theater community of timelines, at least in New York, because it's so specific to the community you're in with this pandemic. And so once Broadway was like, yeah, like September is going to be the earliest at this point, that allowed so many artists that were holding on, even if they were in those shows, to say, great, I got a piece out for the summer. Or maybe at this point, there's a lot of people that may have moved permanently, just because we don't know. But at the same time, I think because I know people with this as well, there are people that don't really have the luxury of like, well, I go back home to my hometown, because they're born and bred in these cities. Like, these cities are their home, and so that's a different beast, and that's a different battle. Because what do you do when you can't really afford it, but you don't have somewhere else to fall back on either?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's the same in the Bay Area as well.
It's I feel you know, at Unscripted, there was a big, like, right when this happened, a bunch of us wanted to close for good because they did not feel like it was appropriate to be asking for our people who love us to help support us paying full rent. And so I basically was like, I will spend my entire time trying to get our landlord to give us a rent reduction. And I spent basically 2 months, like, talking to lawyers, talking to nonprofit organizations, going back and forth with our landlord, who is a very hands-off kind of guy, and eventually he agreed to a rent reduction, and that was the point where we started asking for money. And so we asked for a very modest amount because, like you were saying, like, it was you know, it's just going to be a couple weeks, it's just going to be a month, it's just going to be a couple of months. So we were like, okay, well, let's get through the spring, basically. Let's ask for money. And we almost immediately hit that goal, and which was shocking, that we were able to raise.
Everyone loves you. Don't be shocked.
I was shocked. You know, it's like, it's a thing that we started, you know, with just a bunch of other improvisers. But I forget that, you know, every show that we do, we have guests that come through, and every class that we teach, we have students that come through, and there's a lot of people we're an all volunteer organization. Nobody's getting paid. We all just donate our time to this thing, and we'd love to move away from that and start paying ourselves. I'm doing a thing again. But there's a lot of people who want to see it continue. And now we've hit the new goal where we said, all right, well, let's fund ourselves through the summer. And then we'll do a new push at the end of summer if we still need to keep this going. I mean, look, the fundraiser is still going on. If anybody watches this and wants to, you know, help out, you can definitely donate to our GoFundMe campaign. Here, I'll put the link in the description. But yeah, all of that will just go to trying to sort of keep this thing alive. And the best we can do kind of as artists and people who are a part of the culture is really support each other as best we can and try to help out. Like, for example, my friends at Vaudeville Society, who's a circus here in San Francisco, like, they're doing a benefit show tonight online. And the last one they did was to help the community, or to help the organization. And then this is their second one they're doing, and all of the money is going to the performers. You know, it's like every little way that people could come up with cool I mean, I watched Bats do one of their very first shows on Zoom, and, you know, they raised $3,000 in one show. Like, there are people out there from around the world who've interacted with your art form who love you and want to keep you continuing. And every one single thing that we can save is another thing that won't be lost at the end of this. Because if everything gets lost, then it will have a very hard time having sort of the culture that we all need to exist, you know, and that goes, you know.
And you could just all move out here and like, we'll rebuild.
Okay, we'll do that. Well, I think we've come to our full hour of our doing this.
Oh, there's so much more to say.
I know, you and I texted about all these great ideas about things we could talk about, and we got to none of them.
Some of it. But yeah, if you're in New York and you want to do what Unscripted does, get in touch with me.
Well, you know, the
folks here who want to do it too.
The West Coast Musical Improv Festival that we host has been postponed, but it might, you know, we're not opening and going to murder our audience. We're not going to open and we're going to murder our performers. Like, we will stay closed for as long as it is necessary for us to stay safe. And we will, you know, if that means that it's silly for us to hang on to the space, then fine. But with our lower rent, it does give us the opportunity to try to weather the storm. And we'd love to do the West Coast Musical Improv Festival. It brings people from all over the country to this. We love the New York Musical Improv Festival. We love going out there and performing out there with that whole crew and meeting new people. Like, it's
yeah.
Well, we'll hang out again for sure.
We will. And for now, if anything, this has expanded our audiences in a way as artists to beyond just the city we live in, because we're all, doesn't matter if you're in London or New York or San Francisco, like whatever we're putting out is kind of available to a wider audience. So,
well, thanks for doing this with me. We'll do it again. We'll bring this back around again.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks for coming. I'm sorry about the video pixelated thing. You're doing it again. It's happening. You had like 2 mouths and 4 eyes.
I really blame it on you.
Oh, it's probably true. Well, now you're doing it again. It didn't fix it. I don't know what's going on.
Oh my, this is a sign. We're done.
Well, thanks for doing this, and I'll don't hang up now. We'll do a little post wrap up. But thank you everybody for watching this. Even if you didn't see it live, you can always catch it later, and we'll see you next time at online. Woohoo! All right, and then I hit the end button.